What do we leave behind when we're gone? We leave photographs in dusty albums, objects that once held meaning, an inheritance that can be measured in numbers. But is that all? The investigation I've been conducting leads me to believe it's not. It seems we also leave behind an echo, an imprint of our wisdom, our care, our love, a protective presence that remains tied to those who mattered most to us. And sometimes, in moments of great danger or uncertainty, that echo finds a way to speak. The records I am opening today are about this very thing. They are the stories of two ordinary people who received a warning, a piece of advice from a place that should no longer be able to communicate. We will hear the account of a widow who, facing a financial decision that could have ruined her life, received guidance from her late husband in a vivid dream. And then, the story of a grandson who, upon inheriting his grandfather's tools, felt a warning about a physical danger, hidden in the wood and steel of a simple hammer. Are these just memories, our subconscious minds giving us the advice we already knew we needed? Or is it possible that love creates a presence that time and death cannot erase? What you are about to hear, in their own words, might define what you believe. Story 1. The Old Oak Trees. My name is Eleanor. I was married to my husband, David, for 45 years. He was an accountant, a man of quiet certainty, of numbers that added up, of slow and steady growth. I'm a painter. I live in a world of colors, of feelings, of chaotic beauty. We were, in every sense of the word, a perfect balance. He grounded me. I gave him wings. For 45 years, he handled the bills, the investments, the boring, terrifying paperwork of life. He was my anchor in the practical world. And 6 months ago, after a short, brutal fight with cancer, my anchor was gone. The grief, I discovered, is not a feeling. It's a place. A gray, silent, fog-filled room where you are forced to live. The house, once filled with his quiet whistling and the shuffling of his slippers on the hardwood floor, was now utterly silent. The silence was a presence in itself, heavy and suffocating. But the epicenter of that silence, the heart of my fear, was his office. It was a room I had rarely entered, a sanctuary of leather-bound books, the faint, sweet scent of his pipe tobacco clinging to the curtains, and his large oak desk. On that desk sat a mountain of files, of stock certificates, of handwritten ledgers and tax forms from a decade ago. It was the physical manifestation of my new, terrifying responsibility. For weeks, I couldn't bring myself to even open the door. The thought of touching those papers, of trying to decipher the language of a world I had so willingly abdicated to him, filled me with a paralyzing dread. But the world doesn't stop for grief. A cousin of mine, meaning well, recommended a financial advisor. "He's brilliant, Ellie," she'd said. "He's helping all my friends. He'll know what to do." So I made the call. His name was Mr. Klein. He arrived exactly on time, a young, sharp man in a suit that probably cost more than my car. He smelled of expensive cologne and sent so alien in David's quiet home that it felt like an invasion. He was disarmingly charming, his smile perfectly white, his voice a smooth, reassuring baritone. I led him to the living room, and he sat on the edge of the sofa, exuding an energy that felt both predatory and exciting. I brought him the main portfolio file from David's desk, my hands trembling slightly as I handed it over. He opened it, his perfectly manicured fingers scanning the pages of numbers. He made a soft, pitying sound, a little clicking of the tongue. "Eleanor," he said, looking up at me with what seemed like profound sympathy. David was a very traditional man, a man of his time. "This portfolio is safe, yes. As safe as hiding your money under a mattress, but it's stagnant. It's old money from an old world. In today's market, this money isn't working for you. It's sleeping." He then opened his own sleek leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy brochure. The front read, "Apex Tech Growth Fund," in a futuristic silver font. It was full of impressive charts, graphs that all pointed aggressively towards the sky, and the logos of exciting new companies I'd never heard of, with names full of X's and Z's. "This," he said, tapping the brochure, "is the future. This is where growth is happening. We liquidate these old, sleepy, blue-chip stocks, and we put your nest egg here. The returns are significant." He threw out numbers that made my head spin. "You'll be able to travel to renovate the house, to really live without a single financial worry for the rest of your life." It was seductive. He made David's careful, lifelong work of accumulation seem obsolete, foolish even. He was selling a future while I was clinging to a past. He saw the conflict on my face. "Look," he said, his voice softening. "I know this is hard, but David would have wanted you to be secure, to be prosperous. He would have wanted you to adapt." He left the paperwork on the coffee table. It looked official, intimidating. "Think it over," he said, but his tone implied there was only one smart choice. "I'll call you on Friday morning to finalize the transfer. This is a time-sensitive opportunity." The next 2 days were torture. I felt like a traitor. I'd walk past David's office, and it felt like his portrait on the wall was looking at me with disappointed eyes. But I'd look at the glossy Apex brochure, at the promise of wealth and security, and feel the pull of the modern world. Maybe David was old-fashioned. Maybe I was letting sentimentality cloud my judgment, just as Mr. Klein had suggested. The world had changed. Maybe it was time I changed with it. I tried to read David's old ledgers. The neat columns of his handwriting were a comfort, but the numbers were a foreign language. I couldn't make sense of it. Frustrated, I put the ledgers away and pulled out a photo album instead. There we were, younger, planting the 2 oak trees in the backyard when our son was born. There we were, older, sitting on the porch swing, David explaining some complicated financial news from the paper while I only half listened. I remembered his voice, calm and steady. "Slow and steady, Ellie. The tortoise beats the hare, always." That night, the night before the Friday call, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, the house groaning around me. David's voice of caution warred with Klein's voice of opportunity. Was I honoring my husband by protecting his legacy, or was I failing him by not being brave enough to forge a new path? The weight of the decision was crushing. I finally drifted off around 3 a.m. into a heavy, restless sleep, begging for an answer. And an answer came. It wasn't a strange, surreal dream. It was simple. It felt more real than my waking life. I was in our garden, the one David and I had poured our souls into for 40 years. It was a perfect spring afternoon. The sun was warm on my skin, and I could smell the rich, damp earth and the sweet perfume of the peace roses he had cultivated so carefully. David was there. He wasn't sick. He wasn't a ghost. He looked exactly as I remembered him from 10 years ago. Healthy, strong, his hands covered in soil, a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He was pruning his prize-winning rose bushes, his movements precise and confident. He didn't look at me, but I felt his presence beside me, solid and real. He spoke, and his voice was not a memory. It was as clear as the birdsong in the air. "Don't let them cut down the old oak trees to plant those flimsy saplings, Ellie," he said, his voice calm and steady as he snipped a withered branch. "The roots are deep. Storms will come, and those saplings will snap in the first high wind. But the old oaks will survive the storm." That was it. He snipped a final, perfect red rose from the bush, and the dream dissolved. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding not with fear, but with a profound sense of peace. The sun was streaming through the bedroom window. The agonizing doubt of the past week was gone, washed away. It wasn't a dream about gardening. It was the clearest financial advice I had ever received. The old oak trees were his lifelong, reliable stocks. The flimsy saplings were the flashy, high-risk tech companies. The message was unambiguous, but for a moment, my rational 21st century mind fought back. It was a dream, Eleanor, a beautiful, comforting dream, but just a product of your own stressed-out mind. You were anxious, so your subconscious cooked up a perfect metaphor to make you feel better. It wasn't real. The phone rang at 10 a.m., sharp. It was Mr. Klein. "Good morning, Eleanor." His voice boomed with false cheer. "Are you ready to step into a more profitable future?" I stood in David's office, the phone to my ear, the transfer documents on the desk in front of me, a pen in my hand. My logical mind was screaming at me to sign, to trust the expert, the man with the charts and the data, but my heart was screaming the words of the dream. Through the window, I could see the 2 giant oak trees in our backyard, their massive branches reaching for the sky. The dream felt more real than the man on the phone. "Mr. Klein," I said, and I was surprised by the firmness in my own voice. "I've thought it over. I appreciate your time, but I've decided to keep my husband's portfolio exactly as it is. The silence on the other end of the line was immediate and absolute. The charm in his voice vanished, replaced by an icy, condescending irritation. "Eleanor, with all due respect, that is a very unwise, sentimental decision. You are letting grief cloud your judgment. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity you are throwing away." "Perhaps," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "But the decision is final. Thank you for your time." And I hung up before he could say another word. I felt an incredible sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. I had trusted my husband. 2 months later, I was watching the evening news. There was a breaking story. A massive investment fund, the Apex Tech Growth Fund, had collapsed overnight. It was a Ponzi scheme, a complete fraud. The founders had vanished with hundreds of millions of dollars of investors' money. The reporter stood in front of an office building, interviewing tearful retirees, people my age, who had lost everything. Their life savings, their homes, their futures, all gone. And then, a picture of the man who had just been arrested by the FBI in connection with the scheme flashed on the screen. It was Mr. Klein. I just sat there on the sofa, the remote slipping from my hand. The world tilted on its axis. If I hadn't had that dream, if I hadn't listened, I would have been one of those people on the news. My life, David's legacy, all of it would have been turned to dust. I went into his office, not with fear this time, but with a quiet reverence. I picked up one of his old, handwritten ledgers. I still didn't understand the numbers, but I understood the care. I understood the legacy. It wasn't just in the money, it was in the wisdom he had left behind. So I ask you this, have you ever felt the guidance of someone you've lost? A piece of advice in a dream, their favorite song playing on the radio at the exact right moment, a sudden thought that sounds just like their voice. Don't dismiss it as just a memory. It might be the most valuable inheritance they could ever leave you. Story 2. The Grandfather's Hammer. My name is Ben. I'm a graphic designer, which means I spend most of my life moving pixels around on a screen. I am, by no stretch of the imagination, a handyman. My grandfather, on the other hand, Grandpa Joe, was a magician with wood and steel. He could build a cabinet, fix an engine, or wire a house with a quiet confidence that always seemed like a superpower to me as a kid. His workshop in the garage was my favorite place on earth, a cathedral of sawdust and the smell of oil, filled with tools that had stories. He passed away 3 months ago, at 89. It was peaceful, a good end to a good life. When we were cleaning out his house, my dad and uncle were dividing up the big power tools. But they knew the one thing I'd always loved was his old toolbox. A heavy, dark red metal box, dented and scratched from 50 years of use. Inside, every tool had its place, worn smooth by my grandfather's hands. It felt less like a box of tools, and more like a collection of memories. "It's yours, Ben," my dad said. "He would have wanted you to have it." I took it home, with a sense of profound, nostalgic reverence. A month later, my wife, Chloe, and I bought our first house. A charming, slightly run-down place that needed a lot of what the realtor called character, and what I called work. One of our first projects was hanging all our heavy framed pictures and a large mirror in the living room. Chloe looked at the bare walls. "Time to be a homeowner, Ben. Can you handle it?" she teased. "I have the ultimate weapon," I said, and proudly brought out my grandfather's toolbox. I opened it, the familiar click of the latches echoing in our new empty house. I reached for the centerpiece of the collection, his hammer. It was a classic claw hammer, with a beautiful, dark-grained hickory handle, worn to a perfect smoothness from decades of use. It was a beautiful object, but the moment I wrapped my hand around the handle, something felt off. It was cold, unnaturally cold. The garage was warm, the day was mild, but the wooden handle felt like it had been stored in a freezer. It was a deep, penetrating cold that made the joints in my fingers ache, and with the cold came a strange, tingling sensation, a pins and needles feeling that spread up my arm. I put it down, shook my hand, picked it up again. Same thing. Cold, prickly, weird, I mumbled. Must be some old varnish or something reacting to the heat of my hand. I dismissed it, grabbing a drill to make pilot holes instead. A few days later, I was back at it, determined to hang the heavy mirror over the fireplace. It needed a large, sturdy anchor bolt hammered into the wall stud. I grabbed Grandpa Joe's hammer again. This time, the cold was even more intense. It felt hostile. The tingling was a low, insistent buzz, like holding onto a weak electric fence. Again, my logical mind tried to rationalize it. It's static electricity from the dry air. You're imagining things. I stood on the stepladder, nail in one hand, hammer in the other. I measured the spot, took a breath. I swung the hammer back, a simple motion I'd done 1,000 times, and my body refused. My wrist locked up mid-swing, my muscles seized. It was an involuntary, absolute rejection. The hammer stopped in mid-air as if it had hit a glass wall. The buzzing in my arm intensified, and a sharp, stabbing pain shot from my wrist to my elbow. It felt like my own body was screaming at me, "No, do not complete this swing." I tried again, consciously forcing my arm forward. It was like trying to push the north poles of two powerful magnets together. My muscles simply would not obey. I stood there on the ladder, sweating, my arm trembling, holding a hammer that I was physically incapable of using. I felt completely and utterly ridiculous. I could hear Chloe in the other room. What would she think if she saw me, frozen, having a standoff with a simple tool, defeated and confused? I climbed down. I put my grandfather's hammer back in the toolbox and went to the garage to find the cheap, plastic-handled hammer that came with a generic toolkit I'd gotten for college. I went back to the ladder, swung it back, hit the nail. It worked perfectly, but the experience haunted me for the rest of the day. Why? Why had my body refused to use that specific hammer? Was I developing some weird, psychosomatic cramp? Was I allergic to antique wood? The feeling of my wrist locking up, the buzzing energy. It wasn't just a cramp. It felt like a warning. That evening, after Chloe had gone to bed, I went back to the toolbox. I took out the old hammer. The coldness was still there, the strange energy. I sat on the floor, turning it over and over in my hands. I inspected every inch of it. The metal head was worn but solid. The wooden handle was smooth, with no visible cracks. It looked perfect. A perfect, beautiful, unusable tool. I couldn't let it go. I had to know. I took the hammer out to the concrete floor of the garage. I put on a pair of safety goggles, feeling like a mad scientist. My experiment was simple. Was it me, or was it the hammer? I was going to swing it with all my might against a block of scrap wood and see what happened. The first swing, I hesitated. My arm still felt that phantom resistance. I gritted my teeth and forced it. The hammer hit the wood with a solid thwack. The buzzing was intense, but I'd broken through the force field. I swung again, harder. Another solid hit. I felt a surge of relief. See, it was all in your head, you idiot. I decided to swing one last time, with everything I had, to banish the stupid feeling for good. I raised the hammer high over my head, put my whole body into it, and brought it down with a roar of frustration. It did not end with a thwack. It ended with a sharp, sickening crack and a violent whip of air past my face. The wooden handle in my hand suddenly felt light, and the hammer's head was gone. A split second later, I heard a tremendous bang as the heavy steel head ricocheted off the concrete back wall, followed by a shower of plaster and drywall dust from the ceiling. I stood there frozen, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The handle in my hand was splintered at the top. I looked at the back wall. There was a deep dent in the concrete. I looked up. Embedded deep in the drywall of the garage ceiling, exactly where my head had been moments before on the stepladder, was the clawed head of the hammer. It had flown off the handle with the force of a bullet. With trembling hands, I examined the broken handle, and there it was, a hairline fracture, almost invisible to the naked eye, running through the top of the hickory, hidden perfectly by the metal wedges that held the head in place. Decades of my grandfather's powerful swings, of temperature changes, of time itself, had created a critical, fatal weakness. My grandfather, a man of immense strength and familiarity with his tools, probably compensated for the tiny wobble without even thinking. But for me, using it with full force above my head, that hammerhead would have flown off and embedded itself in my skull. The coldness I felt wasn't a ghost. The buzzing wasn't an energy field. It was my own subconscious, my sense of touch that is far more sensitive than my conscious mind, detecting a micro wobble, an infinitesimal instability in the tools balance. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just a box of tools. It was a lifetime of skill and respect for those tools, a muscle memory that I didn't have. And maybe, just maybe, the feeling I got from it was his protective spirit, his echo, embedded in the very grain of the wood. giving me one last, silent piece of advice. So I ask you, have you ever inherited an old object? Something a loved one used their whole life? A watch, a chair, a tool? And did that object ever seem to have a personality, a feeling? Maybe it's not just your imagination. Maybe it's the memory of the hands that held it, still looking out for you. A dream and a feeling. One message sent through the labyrinth of the mind, and another through the universal language of the body. Eleanor's and Ben's stories are, at their core, about the same thing, a legacy that refuses to be silenced. David's warning to Eleanor was a parable, a piece of wisdom that needed to be interpreted to protect her future. Ben's grandfather's warning was a physical block, an instinctual refusal to protect him from immediate danger. It makes me wonder if these echoes from across the divide adapt, if they send us the exact signal we need, in the way we are best equipped to understand it, a message for the soul and another for the muscles. But as I analyze these cases, the connection felt deeper than just love. In both stories, the protagonist was in direct, physical contact with the objects their loved ones had spent a lifetime touching. David's financial ledgers, Joe's tools. This led me down a path of inquiry that borders on science fiction, but perhaps isn't. I found a fringe scientific theory, sometimes called residual object memory. It postulates that objects handled constantly by the same person for decades could, theoretically, retain a bioelectric or quantum trace of their owner, an energy signature. I spoke with a physicist who speculated that this signature could interact with the bioelectric field of a genetically similar relative. Eleanor's dream wouldn't have come from nowhere. It would have been her mind decoding the imprint of calm and caution that David left on his financial journals. The tingling in Ben's hand wasn't just his subconscious. It was his nervous system reacting directly to the imprint of structural danger left in the hammer after years of use. Perhaps we are wrong. Perhaps the dead do not speak. Perhaps they simply leave behind echoes, trapped in the things they loved, waiting for the right person to listen to their silence.